Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, October 17th, and we have a great show for you. First of all, two major breaking pieces of news coming out of the world of basketball. One in the NBA, one out of college basketball. We will get to both of those later on in the show. We will also break down the action from last night in the world of baseball as the Dodgers absolutely decimated the Mets in a must-win game. Then predicting both the ALCS and the NLCS, as there is a doubleheader today. It actually just kicked off. We will do our predictions, and of course, predictions for the Thursday night football game between the Broncos and the Saints, Sean Payton's homecoming. But before we get into all of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, October 17th. But like I was saying, starting off our show today in the world of baseball as the League Championship Series continue to amaze. We had what was a must-win game last night in New York, in Citi Field, the New York Mets hosting the NLCS after the Yankees had just won their last two games just down the road. Back in New York for some baseball, it had been winning, and this was supposed to be a great matchup. Walker Buehler coming in, having struggled just a little bit against the Padres. He got lit up early, kind of settled down later on, but he pitched a gem. Luis Severino also pitched a solid game. He got chased later on, and in our analysis, like we were talking about, it was whoever got to the pitcher first yesterday. That's what we said, and the Dodgers got there first. They were able to take care of some Mets kind of fielding mistakes, some timely hitting to get to an early 2-0 lead in that game, and they never looked back. Kike Hernandez with yet another home run in the postseason. He was 15 in his career. You don't think of Kike Hernandez as that kind of player, but when the spotlight is the brightest, when you need it the most, Kike Hernandez deals a devastating blow to the Mets. And it's not like the Mets didn't have a chance to win this game. Down 2-0 in the second inning, they had the bases loaded with one out. And that's not the only time they had the bases loaded with one out in this game. They end up losing 8-0, a game that could have been a lot different. We had guys like Francisco Lindor up at the plate multiple times with the bases loaded. Francisco Alvarez, who's not a big-time name, but has been solid with the bat in this postseason, was up to bat with the bases loaded. They weren't able to drag anything across. But the big story of this game, outside of the Mets being unable to hit with runners in scoring position, was the Dodgers finding their power. And that is a dangerous thing for this Dodgers team to find. Shohei Ohtani, we talked about Kike Hernandez hitting his home run. That felt like a backbreaker right there. A chest-high fastball down the middle. That's going to get crushed every time. Good wood on that ball. Kike Hernandez is stepping up in the playoffs like he's done his entire career. But Shohei Ohtani, my goodness, a guy that hasn't been average to his standards. His standards, of course, are all-world, all-time standards, so it's kind of hard to stay to your standards, but in his first playoff appearances, his first playoff run, Shohei Ohtani is doing crazy things. He hasn't been that effective, but with runners in scoring position, he is 7 for 8 in this series with a mammoth home run. A home run that I thought was not going to land inside the stadium. This home run towered above Citi Field, landed probably about 10 rows from the edge of the stadium, third level all the way up top. One of the largest home runs, biggest home runs I have ever witnessed. Point blank period. Shohei Ohtani put a exclamation point on that game with that 3-run home run. He has been something special. And this Dodgers team, I talk a lot when I'm breaking down baseball about how much vibes matter. And you might not think that that's a professional way to break down a baseball game, but with how long this season is, with how good these guys are, with how monotonous it can get in 162 season long, in 162 game long season, that kind of vibe, that kind of togetherness in the clubhouse that the Dodgers are showing, that the Dodgers are having fun, is one of the biggest indicators of whether or not a team will be successful. We talked about the Padres, how they were able to rally because Manny Machado got them going, but the Dodgers have been together on this, and that's the biggest difference I'm noticing between this team and the teams of the last 5-10 years that this Dodgers dynasty has been a thing. Right? This is a Dodgers team that has perpetually been one of the most successful franchises, not just in baseball, but in every single sport. If you go by winning percentage, they're easily in the top 5, probably top 3, maybe even number 1 over the last 10, 15 years because of how successful and consistently successful they have been. That is not an easy thing to do, but this team feels different. And as much as I want a Subway Series, as much as I want a repeat of the 2000 World Series where we get a Subway Series in New York for the World Series, as much fun as that would be, this Dodgers team on paper, in the clubhouse, and how they're actually playing on the baseball field right now are just at a completely different level. Now, I said the same thing after Game 1. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I said the same thing after Game 1, and then they put out a stinker in Game 2 and let the Mets have some hope. So it's not over yet. The Mets can still bounce back tonight, but as much as I called that a must-win game for both teams, this is a must win game for the Mets coming up tonight. And we will break down that game in just a second coming up in our next segment. But continuing with this game real quick, I want to shout out Walker Buehler. Walker Buehler was a guy that came in, was struggling. He had injuries the last couple of seasons. He hadn't been himself. His last playoff start, he got blown up for 6 runs against the Padres in the first 2 innings, kind of settled down there towards the end, but he pitched phenomenally in this game. Like I said, getting out of multiple, not 1 but 2 bases loaded 1-out jams for his team to keep the shutout intact. That is a massive outing for them. We talked about how starting pitching was going to be the key for both of them, and he was able to step up to the plate when the Dodgers needed them the most and lock down the Mets lineup. A Mets lineup with Francisco Lindor that's been hitting great, especially Mark Vientos that had been hitting great. He was shut down. That was a phenomenal performance. That was a legacy performance. If the Dodgers go on to win the World Series this year, that is one of those performances that's going to be talked about. Remember when Walker Buehler shut down the Mets and gave us the commanding lead in this series. That is a statement legacy game for him, and he deserves it. He's a great pitcher, been a great pitcher for a long time. He deserves that kind of moment in the playoffs. The Dodgers are steamrolling everyone in their path right now, although maybe that's an overreaction from this game. But like I said, we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to finish up our baseball talk. We are going to get into predictions for the doubleheader tonight. Or today. It's already just started. We'll do a score update as well as the Yankees and Guardians are underway from Cleveland just about 10 minutes ago. And, of course, Game 4 in New York in Citi Field. See if the Mets can keep this series alive. But we'll be right back talking about all that and more here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Everybody in the world die. Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I want to be the greatest. Everybody on the station, look around, feel like everybody in the major. I make this every day. I'm a take shit. Hoping one day I'll blow up in the basement. Damn it, the top is so vacant. I do shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I play and sold out shows are down and facing. Hey, keep my way into people down. Hitting her place all through my town. What that shit don't do right now? Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, October 17th. If you are just tuning in, we just went over what went down in the NLCS Game 3 between the Dodgers and the Mets. That saw the Dodgers absolutely destroy the Mets 8-0 in front of a raucous home crowd. In this segment, we finish off our baseball for today by going over some predictions. There is a doubleheader today in the League Championship Series, starting off with the ALCS, currently underway in the bottom of the first, 0-0 with Cleveland up to bat. We will break down that game, break down Game 4 of the NLDS, and much more in this segment. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, October 17th. But like I was saying, getting into the rest of our baseball talk for the day, we are on to the prediction side of things. We broke down the game that happened last night. Today we have a doubleheader. In the bottom of the first, as I have said it, the Cleveland Guardians have gotten 2 runners on with nobody out on Clark Schmidt. The Yankees up 2-0 in this series right now. They have lined themselves up pretty good to be successful. And as we've talked about a lot when we were breaking down these series earlier, what it's going to come down to is which one of these teams' big 3 is going to show up. Now, for the Yankees, that's obviously Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Giancarlo Stanton, right? And we've seen, especially Soto and Stanton show up. We saw Aaron Judge hit his first home run of the postseason in Game 2 to really extend that lead and get them going. The Guardians' big 3, you obviously have Steven Kwan, who got on base again, hitting .450 in the playoffs, which is, by the way, in case you're not sure, a ridiculous number. He is insane when it comes to contact, and getting on base. Steven Kwan is, but you also have their big 3 behind him. You obviously have Jose Ramirez, Josh Naylor, Lane Thomas as your big 3 power guys. Steven Kwan continues to do his thing. If those 3 guys can get going, it's gonna be that. That's what this comes down to. Which of these teams' big 3 can get going? We've seen when Cleveland gets it going, Lane Thomas has been a huge part of that. We've had teams, we've seen him hit a 3-run home run in the first inning of a game against the Tigers in the DS series. We saw him hit a grand slam against Tariq Skubal in Game 5 to really blow open that game against the Tigers to move them on to the Yankees series. Jose Ramirez hit a home run in the 9th inning to get going in this series. Now, they're off to a good start. Bottom first, nobody out, 2 runners on. But they are down 2-0. And as much as I talk about a must-win game for the Mets, down 2-1, if you fall 3-0 to the Yankees, I know it's happened once, but it's not happening again. This Guardians team isn't that kind of team that the Boston Red Sox were back in, 2004, where they're able to come back against the Yankees down 3-0. That's not something you can rely on. This is as much of a must-win game as it possibly can be. And Matthew Boyd in the first inning wasn't particularly great. 23 pitches, 2 walks, 2 strikeouts though. Didn't allow a hit. This is when we are taking a look at everything and we're saying we need these guys to step up. if you're the Guardians. Now, I don't have a lot of faith in the Guardians to win this series, especially after the way they've performed in game 1 and 2. In game 1, they were outmatched. In game 2, the Yankees tried to lose that game. They really did. The Yankees were not in a position where I think they should have won that game. There were lots of mistakes made by the Guardians, giving the game away. If they don't make those mistakes, the Guardians most likely are tied at 1 right now with home field advantage taking on the Yankees. And I think home field in Cleveland is a big deal. I really do. As much as it is in New York, I think that field in Cleveland, they have been awesome. We've seen the Tigers really come and storm back in the DS series at home over in Detroit. But in Cleveland, the Guardians stepped up. They were the team that was in charge there. They were the ones that had those big moments, and that's what we're waiting on. I think this game in Cleveland wins. Now, obviously, still the first inning. Anything can happen. Still 0-0 right now. But I think Cleveland finds a way to get this one. Garrett Cole didn't play his best baseball last game. This is a game that the Guardians need. I don't think the Guardians get this series, but I do think they get this game. A game that, again, they desperately need. Getting over to the NLDS side of things, we've talked a lot, and especially in our last segment, about what we are expecting in this game. ESPN predicts it basically 50-50 in this one. You got Jose Quintana, who has been amazing, versus Yoshi Yamamoto, who in the playoffs has been good, not the best, but he has higher upside than Quintana does. Quintana is a little bit older. Yoshi Yamamoto, obviously, the rookie signed by the Dodgers out of Japan. This is a massive game for them. Again, if the Dodgers win this, they've all but put this series away. That being said, I don't see a way. Again, maybe this is just because I don't want the Dodgers to win. Maybe there's a little bit of bias in there. But taking a look at these lineups, I know Shohei Ohtani has been playing really good with runners in scoring position. Mookie Betts hasn't had his best postseason. The Hernandezes on this team have been really stepping up. But I think the Mets aren't going to have a dud 2 games in a row. I know they've been able to hit a lot better off of the bullpen, although that didn't seem to make a difference in last night's game. They need to get to the starter early. It's the same keys to the game as it was last night. Whoever gets in first, whoever gets that upper hand early drives out the starter early, because as good as both of these bullpens are, as good as their back ends especially are, their starters are better. Their starters are the keys to these games. And if they can get hot early, these teams tend to carry the momentum. I know the Mets have a lot of come-from-behind victories, but if they lose this one, like we were talking about in the first segment, they are all but out of the playoff race right now. This is a must-win game for them, and I think they're going to get it done. I think they head back to LA tied at 2 for a 1-game set over there. It should be a lot of fun. Both of these games should be awesome. Keep your eyes out for them. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we are turning our attention to football. The NFL, of course, has its Thursday night game. We get the return of Sean Payton to the Superdome in New Orleans for the first time since he retired. We will talk about that game, who I have winning, and a final score prediction coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube, absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, October 17th. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the MLB. We talked about predictions for the two games, one going on right now, and of course, we broke down the Dodgers' absolute domination, powerful win over the Mets in Game 3 of the NLDS. In this segment, we turn our attention to football real quick before taking a look at basketball. Today, taking a look at the Thursday night football matchup between Sean Payton's Broncos, returning to the Superdome for the first time since he retired and was traded to the Broncos. This should be a fun game. But before we get into that, remember, if you'd like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it, or if you are on YouTube, you can do the exact same thing with the Super Chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, October 17th. But like I was saying, getting into some NFL football real quick before we turn our attention to the two pieces of breaking news in basketball, a Thursday night battle, one that on paper doesn't seem too great, but has a lot of really good storylines. Obviously, the headliner and the reason that this was even chosen to be a primetime game in the first place, Sean Payton, legendary Saints coach, returned to the Superdome for the first time since leaving, retiring, being traded to the Broncos, a game that I'm sure both him and the Saints had circled on the calendar because of this revenge-style game. This should be a massive storyline for that. We also have two rookie quarterbacks starting on Thursday Night Football. Bo Nix, who's looked surprisingly okay, at least in my mind, not a big Bo Nix fan, versus Spencer Rattler, who I really liked flashes of in his first start ever against the Bucs last week. Now, both of these teams have been middling, and if we watch the power rankings, I have the Broncos rated slightly ahead of the Saints, 22 versus 20 on this one. Right now, Vegas, the spread has it at -3 for Denver, so Denver is favored in this matchup. Again, this is going to be one of those games where we see which coaching staff is going to do better. Both of these teams are banged up in very key areas. For the Broncos, their best player, Pat Surtain, out with a concussion. That is a brutal blow for that defense, and one that was trying to prey upon a young, unexperienced rookie quarterback, right? For the Saints, Chris Olave out, Rashid Shaheed out, offensive line injured, many key pieces of the defense injured. That running game is going to have to carry itself against a pretty staunch Denver defensive line, a defense for Denver that has carried it, not like a typical Sean Payton team. Where this game gets interesting and where I'm not sure exactly how it's going to go is on Sean Payton's part. I don't know if this is a game that he's been preparing for by drawing up everything, pulling out all the stops, kind of like what we saw the Lions do to the Cowboys last week. And the Saints defense is a defense, as we saw last week, that is susceptible to being thrown against. Now, do I think Baker Mayfield and, Bo Nix have that same kind of ability to beat a defense even after throwing 3 interceptions? No. Do I think Bo Nix has that same kind of ability to put up 51 points? No, I don't. I really don't. But this is a kind of game that strikes me as one that we might possibly see a explosion on offense, a kind of crazy Sean Payton is back kind of game, a masterclass in coaching if he's trying to pull out all of the stops. Now, the Saints, on the other hand, obviously aren't going to let that happen. Again, both of these teams are injured at very, very key places, so I don't think we're going to get the full, slate that we kind of expect from these two teams. The key for the Saints in this one is going to be running the ball. That's been their key all season long. In games where they dominated, especially in the first two games of the season, Alvin Kamara was able to get free, get loose, get wild out there in the defensive backfield, right? They were able to get going, get a lot of yards, and run play action, screen passes, deep passes off of that. Now, Bub Means, the rookie wide receiver for the Saints, is going to have to step up pretty big. He caught his first career touchdown pass on Spencer Rattler's first career touchdown pass. That kind of connection was solid, and he had a really good game. So if you're looking for a kind of dark horse guy to step up in this one, I'm going with him, Bub Means, especially with Pat Surtain out. I'm not the rest of the Broncos cover guys aren't nearly as good, but the Saints are still, regardless, going to try and rely on the run game. If they can't get that going, it's not all lost, because this Broncos team offensively, and we've seen it we've seen it all year long, week in and week out, they have not been able to generate that same kind of consistent offensive firepower that a Sean Payton offense we're used to. Now, Bo Nix has gotten better and better as the year has gone on. I'm not going to lie about that. He has continued to get better, and one part of his game that I've been very, very impressed with has been his ability to escape the pocket and extend plays behind the line of scrimmage. Now, he has been the leading rusher for this team, so it's not just escaping and extending the play behind the line of scrimmage, but he's also got a little bit of that scramble ability you got to watch out for. So you kind of need a QB spy, make sure he doesn't escape. Now, he's more a traditional pocket passer, and when he can, he wants to get that ball out quick. The Broncos' offensive line gets Mike McGlinchey back, though, and that's going to be a huge, huge get for them. We haven't seen a fully healthy Broncos offensive line yet, and it's been solid. It hasn't been great. It's been solid, but it hasn't been one of those top units in the league. I'm not saying Mike McGlinchey is going to make it a top unit in the league, but it's definitely a possibility. The more you look at what this defense, what this offense is trying to do, what the strengths and weaknesses of these teams are, I think this is going to be a very close game. I also think this is going to be one of those ugly Thursday night games. Not too much offense, lots and lots of defense played on both of these sides. Now, again, this is going to come down to who doesn't turn the ball over. And I know that might sound like a boring answer. But when I'm looking at these two rookie quarterbacks, two rookie signal callers that are getting their first real action in prime time, it's going to be who can, stand the spotlight. And I think I'm leaning towards the Broncos in this one. First of all, Sean Payton absolutely has been playing for this. I think he's going to pull out all the stops. I don't think the Saints have that same kind of deep playbook, especially with Spencer Rattler in there, and that's going to make a difference. But also, Bo Nix was in college for the longest time. He was the oldest quarterback in college. He's older than Sam Darnold right now. That's how old he is. He's played the most. He started the most games in college football history. He's got a lot of experience playing in big games at Oregon, big games at Auburn. So I think he's going to be able to handle that a little better. He's also got the weapons that I don't think Spencer Rattler has. Not to say anything on Alvin Kamara and Bub Means there, but they don't compare to Courtland Sutton. They don't compare to Javonte Williams. Maybe a little bit they compare to Javonte Williams, but still, I think Courtland Sutton is going to play a huge part in this game, and I think the Broncos take this one 21-17. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we turn our attention to the world of basketball. Not one, but two massive pieces of breaking news broke right before we went live. We'll be talking about both of those and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, October 17th. If you were just tuning in, we just went over the Thursday night football game between Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos and Spencer Rattler and the New Orleans Saints. In this segment, we turn our attention to the NBA as massive news has come out. Kawhi Leonard is out indefinitely with a knee injury. It's time to talk a little bit about the future for Kawhi. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, October 17th. But like I was saying, getting into the NBA with the season right around the corner, some massive news coming out of LA as Kawhi Leonard, yet another knee injury, is out indefinitely. Will miss at least the beginning of the season. This is not a good look for the Clippers, a team that already went through, in my opinion, one of, if not the worst seasons, off seasons of any NBA team. They lost Paul George. They were up against the second apron, and they made a lot of questionable decisions to stay below it. I really hated their move. It's not a good look, and this is a sinking ship. And without Kawhi Leonard especially, what else is there to do for this Clippers team? You take a look at the roster, there isn't anything, but yet again, Kawhi Leonard out with another knee issue. We saw him make the Olympic team most recently and be out because of injury, replaced by Derek White. That started its own controversy there, but getting back to Kawhi, he missed the Olympics due to an injury. Presumably, this same injury. We don't know for sure. Presumably, the same injury. It's still a knee inflammation injury. The knee has been bothering Kawhi for basically the last 5-10 years of his career. Ever since he missed that whole season in San Antonio, it's just been awful as far as playing. You take a look at the games he played, and last season, he played 68 games. The year before that, and for the last 3 years before that, he hadn't played more than 60 games in any season. Since he came to the Clippers, he's only last season he played more than 60 games. He has been injury prone. He has basically started the rest movement in the NBA. You know, this is a very impactful player, a guy that has won a Finals MVP, has, won 2 Finals MVPs, 2 Defensive Player of the Years, and 2 NBA championships for 2 different NBA teams. This is a guy that has the resume of, a great all-star, not even all-star, Hall of Fame level guy, but he continues to miss games. And this is a guy that I think we need to think about, not only for the Clippers, because this completely ruins their season more than it already was. I think this takes a lot of the potential out of their season. Not that there really was any. I'm very low on the Clippers, but even before this injury. But they opened this new stadium. They need butts in the seats. This was the same issue that we had when they let Paul George go. Now they don't have any draw at all. They don't have anyone to say, come see our new stadium. You'll get to see who? Who are you going to go get to see? He's out indefinitely, which to me sounds like that 1 year back with the Spurs back, in 2017 when he didn't play at all. It's very similar circumstances. Maybe not very happy with the team for not bringing back Paul George. Maybe it isn't as bad as it sounds, but he's just not going to play and go somewhere else. Maybe he's trying to pull that again, like when he went to the Raptors, but maybe not. This is an injury thing that we have to take very seriously, and if he cannot stay on the court for any extended period of time, regardless of how good he is, maybe he's just not, it's not worth playing anymore. I think he can still go out there and give you Hall of Fame minutes. I really do. But you have to be so careful with him. You can't let him play back-to-backs. You can't let him go out and play, 3 games in a week. Otherwise, he doesn't have this ability. He's not, especially with the 65 game rule, he's not going to be able to be up for any awards. And again, that's more of a personal accolade thing. And Kawhi still is one of the best players in the NBA. For sure. I don't think anybody will debate me on that. He's one of the best players in the entire league. But he has to consider it at some point. Is he going to be able to walk at the end of his career if he keeps playing? Sergio says he's robbing the Clippers, and you're right. To a certain extent, he is. If he's injured, I want him to get healthy, but he just doesn't play anymore. And it's becoming one of the more frustrating stories to follow in all of the NBA. Right? Yeah. And that's another thing to bring up, Sergio. If he's in and out of the lineup, OKC will get a pick, right? Because if the Clippers are bad, like I think they're going to be regardless, the Clippers have the ability, the Oklahoma City Thunder have the ability to pick swap with them this year. So instead of tanking, which doesn't make any sense for them anyway, they're a team that wants to win. Again, they opened this new stadium. They want people in. They want people to show up, get loud in that stadium that they just paid $1 bajillion for. It's just not a good look. It really isn't. They're a team that should be tanking, but they can't because it doesn't make sense this year. Again, then OKC would potentially win the West and get a top 5 pick in the draft this year. So they need to try to compete, and they're going to try to compete, not just for the sake of the draft pick, but because of, again, that whole stadium deal. But Kawhi Leonard being out indefinitely, you really need to think about his health. You need to think about what he's going to do after basketball, and I think you need to think about him retiring. It's kind of a tough conversation to have, but he's been hurt so often, he barely plays, and I don't think he will retire. I think he's still got another 2-3 years of basketball left in him if he keeps playing 40 games a season. But it's getting to that point where 12 years in, if he's continuing to have these lingering issues that won't go away, it's time to think about moving on, not just for the Clippers, but for Kawhi and his health as well. Sergio says he thinks they'll be okay at best. I agree. Again, even before this move happened, even before we learned he's going to be out indefinitely with this knee issue, I hated what they did in the offseason, honestly. I think they might have had the worst offseason in all of basketball, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't think that team is going to be able to compete at all. I don't think they even make the play-ins. But what would you do? Do you think Kawhi should retire? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll finish off our show with the other piece of breaking news from the world of basketball. Tony Bennett, coach of Virginia, winner of the 2019 NCAA March Madness, is set to retire tomorrow out of nowhere. We'll talk about that, what that means for the future of Virginia basketball, what that means for this year in the NCAA and the ACC, and much more. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, October 17th. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over Kawhi Leonard being out indefinitely, a major blow for the Clippers and their hopes of being any kind of competitive this season, as well as whether or not he should retire or will retire. In this segment, we finish off our show with some college basketball news. Tony Bennett, winner of the NCAA March Madness tournament in 2019 with Virginia, all of a sudden is retiring, he announced tomorrow, on the brink of the season kicking off for Virginia. We'll talk about what that means in just a second, but before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, October 17th. But like I was saying, excuse me, in this segment, we are going to finish off our show talking a little bit about some college basketball. Tony Bennett, coach of Virginia, again, winner of the 2019 NCAA March Madness, to retire tomorrow. This news comes out of nowhere. I know in the March Madness tournament last season, when Virginia looked awful, they did their thing where, they hold the ball for 40 out of the 60 minutes, for like 30 out of the 40 minutes of the basketball game, and then, they only score 20 points. It's ridiculous. They cannot shoot the ball. They play great defense. They do. It's just Tony Bennett's style of basketball. We talked about two coaches that should move on from their schools in John Calipari, who moved on, went to Arkansas, and Tony Bennett, the other guy that I thought should move on, the other one that I think Virginia should move on from. And it's tough to, because, you get all that goodwill you get from winning the NCAA tournament. Not an easy thing to do. You get a lot of glory from it. You get a long, long, long leash. But for Virginia, they needed to look in the mirror. They needed to make this tough decision, and I think this benefits their program in the long run. As good as Tony Bennett was as a coach, as great of a defensive mind as he was not recruiting players that could score. And as you can play the greatest defense in the world, but if you cannot score the basketball, you are not going to consistently win basketball games. And that is the problem that Tony Bennett and Virginia were running into time in and time out again when they kept running into these teams like a Furman, like UMBC, for example, that would be able to just put high volumes of threes in, and that just wouldn't do anything against their defense, as good as it was, wouldn't be able to realistically stop them 100% of the time. They don't have the offensive firepower to come back if they fall behind. And it was particularly bad in the play-in game, one that they ended up winning, scratching by, but then getting killed in the round of 64, right? This is one of those moments where, as big and shocking of a revelation as this is, as big of a piece of news as Tony Bennett retiring out of nowhere, throwing that whole Virginia program into whack, this season is going to suck for them because they lose their head coach after all these players have committed. They can't go anywhere now. A lot of these players in college, you see it happen. When a coach leaves, they follow them. They came here because of that coach a lot of the time. They don't always come there for the school. They come there for that coach. That coach said, you come and play for me. They play for him, loyal to the coach, not the school. And I completely understand that. As much as I think it was the right decision for Tony Bennett to move on, if he truly wanted Virginia to succeed, if he wanted to leave a legacy of success at Virginia, he shouldn't have done this 2 weeks before the season starts. He should have done this 5 months ago, after the NCAA tournament. He should have done this 4 months ago when we were talking about Dan Hurley and his contract. He should have done this 3 months ago when recruits still had the ability to go and transfer and make their decision. As much as I like Tony Bennett, as much as I think Tony Bennett is a good coach, and I don't know the circumstances of him retiring, Maybe this was something that had to do with personal health or family reasons. And if that's the case, I take back all the vitriol that I'm throwing out there. I understand. If you need to take a step aside, do it. I understand for your health and stuff. But if you're just stepping aside because you're like, I'm done, which I doubt. But that's what I'm operating off of right now because he hasn't said why he retires. Probably will say tomorrow. This sucks for the Virginia program, for those kids in the program, for those players that have said, we will commit to you for the next 4 years, next 3 years, next 2 years, next however many years of our lives. It throws everything into chaos. And I think Virginia will still be a good basketball team. This isn't going to ruin their chances of being a competitive basketball team this year. This is still a Virginia squad that is going to win basketball games because they have all the recruiting. But I think the morale of that team, the ability, the want to play hard that you need in that Tony Bennett system and that assistant coach system that's going to step up in the interim, it's not going to work. That Virginia team relies so much on the players buying in, playing with effort. And without Tony Bennett there, they're not going to get that. This Virginia team, I think, still has the talent to potentially be a, 8 seed in the tournament this year, right? But without that effort, that system doesn't work. And they're not going to play with their best effort if Tony Bennett just up and leaves like that. I don't understand the timing of this move. I think it's the right move for the future, but the timing of this move could not be more off. This should have happened if he was going to do it about 3, 4, 5 months ago. And that's all it is to it. I like this move for Virginia. I think maybe it's Tony Bennett saying, all right, I see I'm not going to be successful anymore. I need to move on. Although that seems like something that he wouldn't do. I hope it isn't a medical thing. Again, I haven't seen the circumstances surrounding the retirement, and I wish him well. He was a great coach. He still is a great coach, but that system isn't working in Virginia. He needs to adapt a little bit. You can still play with that defensive system. You just need guys that can shoot the ball effectively as well. And that's going to be the difference between the team middling out and the team being a threat. And he hadn't learned that, or at least he hadn't been able to find guys to be that scoring threat, that consistent scoring threat that you need to win in college basketball. But let me know what you think. I hope it's not a health reason. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take we'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday. It is Game Picks Friday. We'll pick and predict all of the NFL slate. We'll pick and predict a lot of the biggest games from college football this weekend and much more. So make sure you tune in for that. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. I appreciate everybody so much for tuning in to today's show. You've been watching Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus, and I will see you tomorrow. You all have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I feel like it's gonna be a bad day. I'm tired of shit.